Welcome to the Franchise Your Freedom podcast, where we share best practices for investigating, selecting, and building a successful franchise. I'm David Weaver, a franchise investor, franchise consultant, and your host. I interview successful franchisees and franchisors so you can hear from them what it takes and what it's like to successfully start, build, and sell a franchise for yourself. Let's get started. Welcome to our latest episode of Franchise Your Freedom podcast. Today, we've got Jason and John from My Franchise CPAs. I'm really excited to get their perspective on what it means to be a successful franchisee. Why don't we start the conversation with John sharing with us a little bit about how you started your firm and why you've got to focus on the franchise space.
Sure, that's a great question. Appreciate you both for having us on. Our firm is called My Franchise CPAs. We started the firm. We really begun to operate at the beginning of 2018, and it was really just me and Jason. So we started the firm with no clients, no plan, and really quickly through mutual connection of mine, got into the franchise space. And once we got here, we realized wow, this is a space where there's a lot of very, very small, very, very new business owners, at least like the side that we got introduced on, startup side, and they need what we do. They need like financial advice and understanding how what a burn rate is and what a runway is and how taxes work in their state specifically. Like there's a lot of stuff that they don't know when they're starting out. And that's really where we've been able to provide just a ton of value.
Fantastic. So talk about runway. I use that word runway a lot as I'm consulting candidates in identifying things like speed to break even or when a business gets cash flow positive, and to really pay attention to how you calculate that or get your hands around what that looks like. So define for our listeners what you mean by runway and why that's so important.
Runway is really just if you were to stop your operations today, how long would you be able to survive off of what you have for business, runs out of money? That's related to burn rate, which is just the rate of like how, for example, per month, how much money do we burn through. So your burn rate, for example, could be 20 grand and you might have 9 or 10 months of cash left at that rate.
Excellent. So yeah, those are two concepts that I get people to identify so that they can ask franchise owners, when does the business tip over, right? It turns cash flow positive. Very important in the calculation before you make the decision to be a franchise owner. And that's one of the things that we pride ourselves at Franchise Your Freedom is, how do you become an educated buyer? And part of that education is really understanding that business budget for your business specifically, right? And then how do you build that by talking to other franchise owners? Jason, you've been at this for a long time. Share with us a little bit about how many brands do you guys represent or work with, and maybe what categories of businesses? Do you have a lot of fitness brands? Do you have a lot of painting franchises? Do you have 150 different franchise brands, or do you work with 4 or 5?
That's a good question. So a lot of our clients come from getting an SBA loan, or they've just done a ROBS. So as far as a specific industry, I would say we're probably most concentrated in home service based. But we also have, as time is going by, we're also getting, freestanding locations in all industries. We have clients that are in the fitness space. It's all over, but the main piece of it, more than anything, they're all small business, and we're not opposed to any industry at all. I'd say we've worked with probably over 100 brands, and consistently in our client roster right now, we're probably at about 35 brands maybe that we're currently working with. From our perspective, operationally, businesses have some differences, but from a financial aspect, you're still running a business, right? There's uniqueness to each one, but fundamentally, we're still operating a business. You've still got to pay attention to your cost of goods sold, your price point for sales. Those are all common things across business. But currently, yeah, we're heavily focused in the home service, and we are looking to expand into other brands, non-medical in-home care, just because of the way that industry is going to grow in the future. So we're willing to work with any brand, but we're starting to shift our focus to ones that may become more economically prosperous as time goes by. That's why I mentioned the non-medical in-home care, as especially after COVID, people are more willing to, I guess, take care of their parents in a way, or take care of themselves in a way where they're not stuck in a home. And the way that our population is aging, just by nature itself, it's going to be expanding.
Absolutely. So you bring up a lot of good points in there, Jason, that are obvious to me, but maybe not obvious to our listeners. When John was saying that you guys started in 2018, and then you kind of built your business through the COVID years, et cetera, and your business is a lot of home services concepts, that doesn't surprise me at all, right? Because home services accelerated through COVID as consumers shifted their spending habits away from things like travel because we couldn't, to improving their homes, and those franchise brands flourished. And now through COVID, because of COVID, you're absolutely right. In-home senior care is a segment that is regaining popularity. It really, that industry segment took off in 2006-7 timeframe, and then it sort of plateaued as everybody moved in the, I don't know, 2012 to 2015 to the fixed retail, fitness, food, things like that. What we see is the expansion, a lot of focus on non-medical care, senior care, which you reference, and also sort of med spa type scenarios, as the entire country got stuck on Zoom for several years. Looking good and looking good on camera became a big focus. And so there was an explosion in staying young, looking young kind of thing. So skin, facial concepts, med spas, all of those kinds of things we see as an area of growth, which is really fun. So I'm glad that you kind of pointed that out, because people are always asking me, what's the hot new thing? And really, you want to pay attention to, where does the consumer wallet go, and how does that impact the future growth of the business? So that's really smart. John, if you could touch on, what are the characteristics or the things that you see? You guys get to see a lot of P&L statements and a lot of tax returns from a lot of different kinds of franchise owners. What are some commonalities that you notice in successful franchise owners versus maybe those that are struggling a little bit? Do you have anything that you can point to, or is it really case by case and franchisee to franchisee?
Well, the last part, what you said there is always going to be an element of that, like the operator. Do they have the skill set? Have they done this before? Is this like way out of left field and brand new for them? And we see it makes a difference. But from a P&L standpoint, there's a couple of things. One, the ones that we see that struggle are the ones that their sales just stay consistent. They can't seem to like break out. They'll be right there at like 10, 15, 12, 13, 10, 30. It's like, hey, at some point you need to break out and figure out, like, that should scream at them, something is wrong with my sales funnel, something's going wrong. And I'll typically explore that with them, even though we're not a marketing firm, but we can tell from spend, like, okay, I think there could be an issue here. We have a one client, and I guess I won't name brands or individuals, but it's like a dryer vent, like a cleaning franchise. There's a few of them out there, and we explored that because it didn't make sense. Like, why can't they get their sales up? We found that the call center that was receiving calls was dropping calls a lot, and the ones that it did take, it asked like they would ask like 20 questions, and the people on the phone would get frustrated. Like, I'm just trying to get a dryer vent cleaning. I don't need to play 20 questions. So they would hang up. So we found that's just one issue, that seeing the numbers kind of, was like a window into what could be wrong, or at least was like a signal to us to explore more. So we see that, and obvious one is if they can't break a profit. We do see that, where they just are, it's some of an element of getting their sales up, but it's also a cost control thing. And that could just be from in experience. I will say too, Jason brought up COVID, your interest rates went up, your inflation went up. So we did see that reflect in P&Ls as well. So there's a few different things. A healthy P&L will be one that the top line is growing at a healthy clip. We want to see that number just keep going up on a month to month. They're hitting the profit targets, the gross profit, which we find a lot of franchisees will just ignore and go right down to the bottom line. But right there at gross profit, that will tell you if there's like a fundamental issue with how you have your operation set up. Your pricing could be completely off. You might just have too many people, your labor and your materials costs are what are going to determine your gross profits, your sales less labor and materials. So yeah, that's a couple things.
That's fantastic. And I noticed, Jason, what our listeners can't see, you nod your head. Yes. Why is it smart for a franchise owner? Well, let's simplify it for our listeners. What is the main difference between gross profit margin and net profit margin as it relates to understanding the fundamental? You're just understanding your numbers. Why is focusing first on gross profit, then on net profit such an important factor?
Well, I mean, John and I kind of look at this, with what's your pricing at, right? And so typically what we see is if we look at gross profit, we can work back into your pricing, right? If your pricing, let's say your gross profit is 30%. Well, let's look at that. Is it your cost of goods sold? What does all that look like? And a lot of times you can get to a point where they're giving too many discounts. This is a major, major thing we see is the discount. And your price is right, but you want the job so bad that you'll give a 25, a 30%, a 40%, a 50% discount. And so essentially what our client has done is given away everything right there just to get the deal. So they're not looking at things in a way that they can control. And the discount is the one piece that they do have control over. We work with, and I won't give anything away here, we have a client who came on board with us. Their books were a mess. We got them cleaned up. And then we started looking at fundamentals of his business. And I said to him, I said, look at your discounts. And I showed him how his discounts hit his gross profit and how that actually reflected in his net profit. So what we learned is that for every dollar he reduced his discount, that was going to be $3 in net income or net profit to him. So we started looking at it like, okay, well, what if you could reduce the discount by 5% rather than, and then whittle down. So his discounts, objectively, he wants to get his discount as low as possible. And this goes back to what John was saying is there's a sales component of this, right? That they need to fundamentally understand as well, because if they're doing a good job on the sales delivery, then they're going to be able to get the deal at the reduced discount rate, get their gross profit percentage up, and then it's going to reflect in their net income. So Joey reduced his overall percentage by about 7 to 8%, and that increased his profitability threefold. So his net income went up 20% just by changing the numbers up here and fundamentally kind of understanding gross profit, what he can control, what he can't control. Now, look, your cost of materials, do you have control on that in the franchise space? A lot of times you don't. The vendors have their price. You can sometimes get discounts, etc. But for the most part, your materials price is your materials price. So if you want to control gross profit, you've got your cost of goods sold, the labor component of it, and you've got your discount. The discount is, I would say, the most important piece for them to understand. That's really the biggest piece right there. And John and I look at this with our clients all the time. Does it make sense for you to do a discount of 35%? It doesn't. It doesn't. Depending upon the job, there's not a job out there where a 35% discount is going to be profitable for most of the franchisees, because the size of the jobs, they're not several $100,000 where there's just huge job. These are $5,000, $10,000 jobs, sometimes less. And so every percentage point that you can gain in your favor, like I said, was the effect to his net profit was threefold. Now, Gross profit is just dealing with your sales and the gross profit from the job. And then there's the net profit, which is after all your operating expenses associated with your business. I think sometimes in the franchise space, people look at that top line revenue and they're not focused on gross profit and then the downstream effect of what it does to net profit.
Man, you hit all
Jason,
kinds of important things in there. Go ahead, Anne-Marie, I'm sorry.
what a great feedback, Jason, you just offered. Like, what great insight. There's so many fundamentals there. I'm fascinated by this notion of consulting or adding services and resources after the fact when they're already in the saddle and driving the results. What else might you suggest in that net profit category as a best practice, or what you see as franchisees doing as a best practice to control that net?
What we see a lot is advertising. That's a big spend on their part where they're not tracking it. You know, this is one thing too that a new franchisee, to explain to them, like, the reason you're getting into the franchise space is that I'm going to open up a painting franchise. Well, if you did it, you know, hey, I'm 20 years old, I open up my painting business, I'm going to get there in 15, 20 years. You open this up because it's a turnkey operation. So with the turnkey operation comes 4 and 5 different ways to market and advertise. And we always want to, what's your return on investment for advertising dollar? Because that can be a bottomless hole if you're not tracking it. And John can attest to this. We had a client who was doing like $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 in advertising a month, and not $1. John, can you go into that? That was Tim.
Yeah, I mean, he just spent he quickly, when we talk about burnt run rate and runway, he just lit the thing on fire like from the get-go. Spending I think about averaging $8,000 a month on marketing, but he turned it on, and we see this a lot. They turn it on and then they just stop paying attention to it. They like, because it is brand new and they've got a lot of stuff to think about. I got to get employees, I got jobs, I got customers. I've never had to deal with all this stuff before. And accounting and taxes and this stuff will often like go into the back of their mind, but it comes roaring back. And this is an example where he looked back and went, oh, wow, I've spent eight grand in a month for like, I think it was 6 or 7 months at that point, and really have nothing to show for it. Sales just, you know, kind of, is that beep, like when you go
Flatline.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for.
And you know, just to kind of go on that one a little bit more, is when it comes to the advertising and marketing spend, there's programs that are built in, there's expectations from the franchisor that the franchisee is going to spend, and we understand that.
Yeah.
But the being able to track it and pivot is going to be important, because hey, you know what? Google could be on fire for 4 months and then it jumps over to TikTok or Facebook or mailers, or, you know, and it's also very territorial. Like your territory may have a way to advertise where it's your mailers or your door hangers. That's what you do. You got to find that out. And like John says, it's not something often that our clients and franchisees in general are looking at, because they are just like their head spinning, because you just like right into this. You, like I mentioned before, not the slow build over time, learning as you go. It's like you're right here. You've got 50 different things you've got to understand quickly. It can easily be overlooked because they think I'm paying someone, they're supposed to do that. Well, yes, they are doing it, but if there's no return on investment, if you've got $5,000 in your marketing budget, swing it around to whatever is hot.
You guys are hitting on so many things that are very important. A lot, it really comes down to, where are the expectations of what is the franchisor going to do, and then what are the expectations that I have to do as the franchisee, right? Which is a lot of times sort of missed in translation. And John really brings a very good point. And both of you, as you're joining a franchise because you want to ramp quickly, and you've heard all of these franchisees that have ramped quickly, so that looks great. And so I want to go ahead and join this franchise. But if you disconnect your responsibility as the franchise owner to drive revenue or close a deal or get the sales, right? You're often disenchanted 8-9 months later because you've spent 8 to 10 grand a month in marketing. The franchisor says these are the 8 to 10 things that you need, the way that you market your business. But a lot of candidates I've noticed, I like to track my placements once people become franchise owners. I want to talk to them. I want to see how it's going and what are you doing, and help them if I can, etc. The biggest thing is you're responsible for the revenue. The marketing is marketing. And I think that one of the big disconnects that I notice is business owners in general, whether they're franchise or non-franchise, they mix sales and marketing into one thing. And marketing is marketing and sales is sales. And sales drives revenue and marketing drives awareness. And awareness doesn't pay the bills. No marketing person or franchisor is going to like me to say that, but that's the truth. And that's really what Jason is emphasizing here, which is really super valuable. So really what I'm reading in all of what you're saying is the successful franchise owners, they measure and track performance on a monthly basis. And I think I agree with you 100%. So what are your sales and what is your sales activity? What is your marketing and what is your marketing activity? But you have to tie it back to sales concentration, which is a business term, or really a banking term that I learned when we were underwriting loans back in the day. That is critical, because what Jason was saying, guys, is sometimes you get leads from Google and then it pivots to Facebook. So that's a sales concentration. Where is your sale coming from and where are you getting your best marketing dollar? And it changes over time. So you have to track where the sales are coming from. What is the lead source? What's the cost of that lead source? So that we can tie all of this financial equation together. Because ultimately what all of us on this podcast want for the franchise owner is profitable franchisees. Because profitable franchisees are happy franchisees, right? And profitable franchisees have longevity. They're going to be business owners for a long period of time, which is really what all of us are after. Jason, if you could touch on what do you see in terms of industry segments? We touched on this earlier in the conversation, but I want to get a little bit deeper. So when I'm talking to a candidate, I want to understand, and I just kind of try to keep things simple. Where does the candidate see themselves? Do they like what I consider non-sexy businesses? Do they like trendy businesses? On the other side of that would be like a fad, right? So fads are hot until they're not. Trends are what I consider a trend would be like a 15-year horizon. You had mentioned, in-home senior care, non-medical senior care. That obviously has been a trend for already 15 years, but I see that as almost maybe a non-sexy because it's such a need. When I think of a non-sexy business, I think of painting. You mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. Window cleaning, I think, is a great business to be in, but not a business that a lot of people see themselves in. Trendy would be the facial concepts, the med spa concepts, the Froyo is a great example. Yes, that thing was hot, and 5 to 10 franchises are selling it, and then we don't talk about Froyo anymore, right? What is your perspective on non-sexy to fad, and what makes sense for the franchise owner in that?
That's a good question. I always look at this as, where is your territory? And what I mean by that is this. We have a client and she's out in Bozeman, Montana. Very trendy spot, big time. And all these wealthy individuals come to Bozeman, Montana. And she has a Pilates franchise or a bar. I forget off the top of my head. Business is booming, right? Business is booming. But we have other clients who have a specific territory, and the territory doesn't lend itself to, or the brand doesn't lend itself to the territory. I'll give you another example. We were working with a client who this is a non-sexy, cleaning up the grease inside of those restaurants that collects, the cafeterias, those types of places, hospitals that have those, the restaurants and stuff in them. Well, he was out in rural West Virginia. There's not enough places with grease for you to be profitable. But meanwhile, there was the most successful franchisee was based in Philadelphia, in the city of Philadelphia, and he would go down the block each day servicing his clients. So his costs were extremely low. His profitability was extremely high. He didn't have to travel far. There's a ton of way to scale there. So having the right territory and the right brand, I think, is really important. But also, the non-sexy thing, like you said, the needs. If you're looking at this thing objectively and you're going, I want to open a business that has, growth in the future, well, where's my territory? What is that territory like? And, it may lend itself to non-medical home care. Like, I live in South Florida. John and I live in South Florida. There's plenty of people who need assisted living here, right? That need someone to come in and help them. I worked at a beach club in college, very well-to-do individuals. They all had someone rather than going into the nursing home. They had someone. So I think that matters. And we have a client right now who opened up a restaurant space. He's out in Missouri, and where he's at in Missouri, he has really good food. There's a video game arcade in this thing. His business is booming. It's just like, it really is about the territory, what's possible there. I think that's the biggest piece. And also on the business owner side, just being objective about, if I'm going to do this, where am I and what would be the best thing for me to do, just from a financial perspective. I know sometimes people have a passion and I want to do something, and that's fine. But sometimes, passion and objectivity, they cross at one point in time where one becomes profitable and the other doesn't. So what are you looking at? That's the big picture. Where's your territory? What does it lend itself to? I live in Boca. If you open up a med spa in Boca, you're probably going to have a line of people out the door, right?
Yeah.
Because looks in South Florida, what you look like is very important. And that makes a lot of sense. And that's kind of how I look at it. John, what do you think?
I was going to say, I thought that was a great answer. If I could just add a couple thoughts. Another one is skill set I mentioned before. Like, is this going to be have you, whether it's a trendy brand or, like home service, kind of like our big concentration that are more like, even in a recession, like people are still going to need windows cleaned and lawns cut. I mean, do you have the skill set running that type of business? And then also being objective, like Jason was saying, objective and honest with yourself about, am I doing a trendy thing? If it's kind of known to be trendy, then treat that way. This isn't going to be a long-term, long-standing thing. Get in, you probably want to build up your business to a certain level and sell. And that would be like your best strat. So being planning ahead, let's say that, like really planning out what you want to do, I think is important.
Man, you guys both just hit on some really excellent points and things that I like to point out to candidates as I'm taking them through the process. John, what you just said is establish a plan. And what I love about franchising is you have a predetermined plan on making this selection on what franchise you would select, because we can talk to franchise owners, we can see the FDD, we can understand the earnings, potential earnings through item 19, what does it cost to get started, through item 7. We also have an operational plan in building that business to a predictable top line revenue or size of business. What a business maturity looks like within a certain franchise brand, in terms of most of these things do $500,000 in revenue, or most of them do $1 million in revenue, et cetera. And therefore you also have a predetermined exit. What is a multiple of earnings within franchising? So I love the plan. And that's one of the reasons why I love franchising, is it is very predictable if you know what to look for and the right kinds of questions to ask. Now, Jason, you brought up another thing that I talk to candidates about all the time that I want Anne-Marie to expand on, which is following your passion and also blending that passion with business fundamentals, right? So a lot of people want to be in a business that they're passionate about, right? And my wife and I, Anne-Marie, got into the massage business. Anne-Marie, I would like you to expand on your passion for women's services and why massage and all of that. We saw massage as a trend, right? Whole Foods, like the wellness was really, we bought these in 2013. We had a couple locations, built them up and sold them in 2017. So to John's point, very defined project, right? And that was a successful buy, build, and exit. Okay. But getting into the massage business was actually something that Anne wanted to do, and she understood that business. But we're tying in like 3 different concepts here. Have an established plan, follow your passion, but also understand how to drive revenue because you understand that. So, Ann, can you tie all three of these things together for us?
Yes, and thank you, Dave. John and Jason, like what you're offering here is it's gold. Like a lot of these areas are where, people find what's called trepidation, right? And so David is correct. I did look at a concept that initially started with this concept of passion, right? This is something that appeals to me. But Jason, I want to track back to something that you said, like verbatim. You said, if you were looking at this objectively. And so when you think about all of your clients and you're looking across maybe some of those passion players, and perhaps they didn't do as thorough due diligence, or perhaps didn't dig into the aspects of what's a passion versus what matches my skill sets, is it perceivable to either one of you if your clients have worked with a consultant to help them identify what's a good match to their skills as well as their passion?
That to me is going to be one of the biggest important pieces of this.
Yeah.
Is when they get to you, David and Ann, we've seen people get placed in situations that it just collapsed in on itself within 6 months and 7 months. And there's a lot of things that happen to get to that point in a short amount of time. But knowing that, we have a client, it's like, man, you're not built for the landscaping industry. Like, you're not built for it. And here's the other piece of it too, is working with the right person to help place them in something that leans into their strong character suits. And like you said, what did they do before? What's their upbringing? How do they currently live their life? Because you may find that, wow, this guy's built for landscaping, or no, man, you need to go open up a cycle bar or something along those lines, right? Like, there's things about you that are going to be important. That I think is a big, big value add, is finding the right consultant to help identify the right situation for you. And that could be so far as, hey, you're looking at this specific territory with the client potentially and going, okay, well, here's your territory. Would it be wise for you to place them in a territory that there's no room for expansion, or there's no something about the territory, it's the zip codes, there's something there where it's not going to be in the best interest of the client because it's just not the right fit. That's the thing, is you as the consultants, you're supposed to be almost like the matchmaker. You know what I mean? That's really what you could call yourself.
Yeah.
We're the matchmakers.
John, go
I
ahead.
agree with all that. I was just going to say, I think that consultants, you want somebody that's really going to get that right fit for you. I think about it like the depth of your service. If you're going down to the, how does the territory work for this brand, you're already probably like leagues ahead of a lot of consultants. So yeah, everybody has their own like process, but if you find a good consultant, use them, like stick with them, I think is important.
This ties into what Jason was talking about earlier. When you're in a rural environment versus a highly populated area like Philadelphia or whatever market you mentioned, that actually matters. So Ann and I live up in the mountains of Colorado. We raised the kids in Denver, but now we've moved up to the mountains, and all of our friends are like, "Oh, you're a franchise guy. I want a Chick-fil-A or bring Chipotle because we don't have one of those in town." I was like, "Well, I know, because our demographics don't support it. There's never going to be a Chipotle here in our town because it doesn't make any sense, right?" Now, there also are other concepts that do really well in a small market economy, right? And the franchisee has all the systems and support of the franchisor, but then they also get to be sort of the mayor of the town, right? And this comes back to skill sets and abilities. So I have conversations with people all the time. Do you want a sales-driven customer acquisition strategy where you're out networking and they call that the mayor of the town, where you know everybody and that's what you enjoy doing as the owner? Or do you need a marketing-driven customer acquisition strategy and you're going to rely on either Google AdWords or TV commercials or whatever to get people to walk in the door? Those are two very different owners, right? Owner types. And they belong in certain kinds of concepts. And if we have the ability on the front end to help explain that to them in a way that makes sense to them, because frankly, if you are, and Ann and I experience this, the massage business is a marketing driven customer acquisition, right? It's attractive because it's a membership based business model, which you guys probably recognize as super attractive on the financial side of things. However, after we built the business and did a fantastic job of driving sales and taking care of customers, and we built that business from a couple $100,000 in revenue closer to $1 million in revenue in a short period of time. So that was fun, exciting. Once we got it built up, she came to me and she was like, kind of getting bored of the business. We had a couple different conversations. What I remember her saying is, David, I'm slugging it out $49 a massage, because that was the industry standard pricing or the franchisor pricing. And she's very good at sales and outgoing and business development, which is obviously how we grew the business so quickly. But that became a negative. Like, the membership-based business model is a positive in that particular business, right? But it also became a negative because she felt like she couldn't move the needle fast enough, right? So I don't know, Ann, if you want to expand on that or share your perspective, but that has a lot to do with fit as it relates to the business owner being in the right business that's going to match their skill set.
Well, I think I'd like to circle back to what My Franchise CPAs and how critical that can be. And just, Dave, since you led into it, just an ounce here of experience share. Started the business with one accountant, went to a different accountant, ended up with a bit of a mess to clean up. And so that's kind of a question for the two of you, is number one, kind of getting started clean from the beginning, from the get-go. And then also, Jason, I want to touch again on the resources, the consulting after the fact. I think the learning curve or the thirst for learning is important. Everyone comes into this industry from a different background or perspective. So can you shed a little light for our listeners on how to get started properly, best practices, and then how to go about the learning curve? Because part of our success was absolutely the learning aspect of financials. So let me turn it over to you.
Well, you mentioned something that we see quite a lot, and that is, getting your books and having clean numbers. You mentioned that. John, we see so many instances where things weren't set up appropriately. They aren't done correctly week over week, month over month, year over year. And then what happens there is it becomes kind of this festering infection in your business, and your books are wrong, and so you can't rely on them. So you say, I'm going to put my head down and just sell, sell, sell. And it becomes this, literally, it gets worse and worse and worse. And I'll give you an example of a guy we were just working with. We helped him set his business up like we do for a lot of startups, and said, hey, this is what we think, based upon what we know about your business. Here's all the things we think you should do. Here's what our service would look like for you. He went to a commoditized kind of race to the bottom approach. They couldn't give him enough feedback or have a skill set. And he was so busy, he let everything go for years. He came back to us just recently, and his business, he's been removed as the owner by his business partners. He owes back taxes for years. He never understood what his business was doing. And the end result is it's ruined his relationship with his business partner. It's ruining his relationship at home. And this all could have been prevented. And I know this is an extreme example, but it's how bad things can get if they're not done right and maintained appropriately. This is the prime example. John and I preach this to our clients. Our job is to get access and do what we need to do on a weekly and monthly basis so that you can focus on the learning curve. We say this all the time. Understanding your business, understanding your territory, understanding pricing, understanding discounts, seeing the return on investment on your dollars, making sure the client service, the client delivery is acceptable and you're getting good feedback, and also working with people like you, finding the right person to help them find the right solution. Then it needs to flow into, I've got the right solution here so that I can focus on what's in front of me and what I can control. And I have the right people with me to look at it and go, all right, well, we're looking at your numbers here. Your discounts were a little high. You see how this impacted gross profit? Do you see how your net income was affected? Now you have actionable things there, and you can go, okay, I need to work on reducing my discounts. How do I do that? Is it the value proposition I'm giving to the client? What is it? But in this case, the client never did any of that. Had built his business to almost $2 million a year. And now the repercussions of not working with the right service provider, never had his books clean. I mean, John, how often do we see it? I mean, it's probably, you're on mute, John, but I would say if we see an existing franchisee, I would say at least 50 to 60% of the books we see are not accurate. And it could be more.
They don't really get how important it is. I think that because accounting is kind of a preventive measure. It's kind of like if you don't get your cleanings done at the dentist, you don't really notice, but then eventually you need a root canal. It's like, oh shoot, that was a big mistake. Can I just share? I thought about an analogy that I think would make it make sense, like why accounting is important for a franchisee. It's so hard to explain. We can explain all day how we can help our clients save a ton of money in taxes because that's actually a dollar saved. But like accounting, again, they don't really, it's like, what is that? Especially to a brand new owner, they don't really understand why that's important. Accounting is a map. That's what it really is. And I think a lot of people come in and open up a franchise and they just think, well, I'm going to come in every day and do a bunch of stuff that I'm supposed to do. And then I'm just going to be a millionaire. And it's like, no, actually, there's a really like a set defined path that you can take up. That destination where you want to go is on this map. So no accounting, no map. You're coming every day and you're walking around in circles. And maybe you're like, okay, I'm going to work really hard. And now you're just running around in circles, but you still don't really know where you're going. If you don't have that map, then you're going to, and this is the other thing. The map is not in English. It's like in French or Chinese or something. So you need the map and then you need someone to decipher it for you so you can actually make the right decisions. That's why accounting is important.
John, that is so spot on. Accounting or your P&L statement, in my mind, is really nothing more than a guidebook or a guideline for making better decisions, which is really what Jason keeps referring to. But what the point that you really made clear is sometimes for some people that P&L statement is written in French. And I don't speak French. I don't even understand what these numbers are supposed to be telling me, right? And when you understand that, it makes all the difference in the world, right? We had a point in our business where somebody that was very close to Anne Marie basically said, "It sounds like you don't," she was talking in circles. "Sounds like you don't know your numbers." And she was like, "Well, I know my numbers. It's this, and this, and you don't know your numbers well enough, or something like that." And click, let me know. Give me a call back when you know your numbers. And that's basically, that was a tough conversation, but boy, was that a turning point. And then when you know your numbers, you start making decisions differently, as Jason was pointing out. If you're discounting 35%, stop discounting. Well, how do I stop discounting? Well, my sales pitch needs to be different, or my value proposition approach needs to be different. Or maybe I'm paying money for a call center that the franchisor says is important, but if it's not effective, then I got to stop spending money on the call center, right? Because it's not effective. But if I'm not measuring, you have to be passionate about measuring your results if you want to be a successful business owner. I think it might be sort of the wrap up of this entire conversation it might be that. I mean, if we just take what all four of us have been talking about, powerful stuff, guys. This has been a very good conversation. Lots of gold intertwined in all of this. What a value to have guys that have the ability to see hundreds and hundreds of P&L statements and produce tax returns and fix people's accounting problems, to share what are the most important things to focus on. And what I feel very validated in, it doesn't come much, it's not a whole lot different than sales minus expenses equal profit. And it's just that simple, but it can get convoluted and complicated as well. So thank you for your time, guys. Where would our listeners be able to find you guys? What's the easiest way to get connected with My Franchise CPAs if I'm a franchisee that maybe has lost my way and I need to get things cleaned up, or I just want to start clean and fresh with people that know what they're doing? How do our listeners find you guys?
Sure. So there's a few different ways. You can always go to our website, My Franchise CPAs, so with S at the end.com. There's a booking link if you want to speak to us directly there. Bunch of good content on our site. We started to produce videos on YouTube, on Instagram. So definitely check us out there as well. Or you can shoot an email to info@myfranchisecpas.com. And we're pretty quick to respond.
Fantastic. I really appreciate your time, guys. This has been a valuable conversation. Again, to our listeners, we want to highlight successful stories for franchise owners, as well as successful stories of franchisors. And John and Jason here have been very helpful in sharing their insight on what they see as successful franchisees. Thank you for your time, guys, and have a wonderful week to all of our listeners.
Yeah. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, David.
Thanks so
Thank you,
much.
Ann. Thank you for having us on.
Thank you.
Absolutely. This has been another episode of the Franchise Your Freedom podcast with David Weaver, where we focus on ideas that can lead to your impact on your community and your family by creating your freedom through franchise ownership. If you found value in what we discussed today, please hit the subscribe button or follow us on your favorite platform.